That's not Chicago values. We don't use terms like winning and losing. We are learning so much about Chicago values this week from Lori Lightfoot, and of course earlier in the week from Police Superintendent Eddie Johnson, who basically said attending the International Association of Police Chiefs conference that Trump addressed on Monday, that was not consistent with Chicago values either. Here's what Trump had to say. See if some of what President Trump had to say, or remind you a little bit, is consistent with your values.
You don't hear it enough. You do an incredible job. The people of this country know it. And the people of this country love you. You don't hear that from these people back here, but they love you. You don't hear it from the fake news. The fake news doesn't like talking about that, but they love you.
That was the message to police generally, and how about Chicago police specifically?
It's embarrassing to us as a nation. All over the world, they're talking about Chicago. Afghanistan is a safe place by comparison. It's true. Police officers of Chicago are entitled to a police superintendent who has their backs and knows what he's doing. You're entitled to a police superintendent who sides with you, with the people of Chicago. The people want this. And with the families of Chicago, not the criminals and the gang members that are here illegally, and not the stupid politicians that have no idea what the hell they're doing.
So we're still working on a working definition of Chicago values, but are Trump's values, as he so articulated, and the actions he's taken in furtherance of those pronouncements he made, are they police's values? Or is Eddie Johnson representative of police values in Chicago and the country? To help us with that question, we're pleased to be joined by Bernie Kerik. He is a former police commissioner for New York City. You'll remember a police commissioner during 9/11. A New York Times bestselling author. He has written about this values issue vis-a-vis Trump and police, since that's what big city mayors like Lori Lightfoot, that's the language they like to use and force their subordinates and appointees like Eddie Johnson to use as well. Bernie Kerik, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
So who's right? Eddie Johnson not attending because that would have been consistent with Chicago and ostensibly Chicago police values, or what President Trump had to say about police in Chicago specifically on Monday?
Here's the way I look at this. One, the police agencies around the country, and this conference that the president talked at was the International Association of Chiefs. So this is executive officers from the rank of captain and above, right up to chief and commissioners from all over the entire country. They all came to Chicago, and they met with probably the staunchest, most aggressive supporter, if you will, of police that I've ever seen in the White House. In this president. My personal opinion on Eddie Johnson not coming to that convention, not attending, I think it's stupid. And I think it's stupid for this one specific reason. Most importantly, Chicago was going through a violent crime spree for the past several years. Violent crime and murder and gangs that knows no bounds, right? They had a higher murder rate than Los Angeles and New York City combined. And this is the kind of stuff that can be fixed with the right leadership and with the right partnerships with the federal agencies. Who runs those federal agencies? The President of the United States. It would have been a perfect opportunity for the superintendent of Chicago PD to sit with the president, talk to the president, tell him his concerns, tell him what he needs, and let the president infuse a federal task force, infuse DEA, the FBI, the ATF, the U.S. Marshals, every federal law enforcement agency possible, push them into Chicago to knock down the gang violence, knock down the violent crime, and knock down the murder.
Well,
but you have a mayor in Chicago that just 3 weeks ago called ICE members racist, called ICE policy racist policy, which is completely it's insane in my opinion. because nobody needs ICE. Nobody needs that federal enforcement arm of law enforcement more than Chicago.
Right.
But you have a mayor denouncing them, criticizing them. I just think it's sad for the people of Chicago.
Well, what are you doing differently in New York, and what are they doing differently in LA, and why are your homicide rates so low, and how could we get there?
Well, look, I think you have to go back to the pre-Giuliani days of 1994, back in the 1990s, when New York City had, 2,400 homicides. I think in 1990 that was the number. In 1994 there were over 2,000. Between 1994 and 2002, Rudy Giuliani knocked the number down, the violent crime number down by 65%, and knocked the homicide rate down by 70%. And basically, he came to the conclusion at the time that nobody wants to live, work, visit, or go to school in a place where they're not safe. You have urban communities throughout the country and in Chicago where people are saying, we need jobs. We need better schools. We need better communities. Well, guess what? You're never going to put jobs in Chicago. You're never going to put those jobs in Chicago if you don't reduce the violent crime. You're never going to put better schools in Chicago if you don't reduce the violent crime and the murder rate, because nobody wants to go there. The only people that wants to go there, that wants to be there, are the thugs that's generating this violent crime and murder rate. So you've got to fix the violent crime.
So let me think about this, though. So New York is still seeing relatively low incidence of violent crime compared to Chicago, even though they have a mayor that I wouldn't describe as necessarily pro-police. And so it's interesting, because one of the things that we argue here, I've argued, is, hey, look, you have to have a police that have the backing of the civilian political authorities, and that didn't happen under Rahm, and it's not happening under Lightfoot, but it's not happening under de Blasio in New York City, and police are still keeping the streets relatively safe. So is it possible, if you have the right sort of culture in the police department, that you can do it even when you're running into interference from the civilian political authorities?
It's not just the culture, it's the policies.
Okay.
It's the policies, and that's why New York City, the crime reduction has continued. That's why the murder rate is the lowest in the history of New York City. Back as long as we've been recording murder, it's now the lowest it's ever been, not because of de Blasio, but because of the policies that were implemented under Giuliani and under Bloomberg. The NYPD has maintained those policies. And to give you an example of how that can change and how it differs, I ran the New York City Department of Correction before the NYPD. I ran Rikers Island, 133,000 inmate admissions per year, 22,000 inmates per day. That was our daily population. We reduced inmate-on-inmate violence by 93%, instilling all the same policies that the NYPD had. When I left the agency, the new people that came in after me, they diminished all those policies. And today, Rikers has half the population I had, but they have more violence.
And they can't even they can't even keep Jeffrey Epstein alive over at the MCC.
Right.
Well, and things like that. So it's not about the culture. It's some of the culture, but a lot of it is policy. How are you addressing crime? How are you calculating crime? How are you collecting the data? How are you putting out your enforcement units? This is all stuff that New York City has become famous for around the world, not only in New York City, not just in the U.S., but basically there are departments all over the world instilling the CompStat program and instituting the same kind of policies. Nobody can tell me that it can't be done. Chicago can be fixed with the right leadership, with the right policies, with the right law enforcement backing and support. But it's never going to change if you don't have leaders like mayors and police commissioners and superintendents to do it.
So just help us, because Eddie Johnson said that in response to Trump's criticisms, and by the way, even though Trump was very critical, he also said, hey, the federal government is here to help anybody who wants help. So Chicago, we're waiting for our phone to ring. He did say that, but he also, Eddie Johnson responding to the president saying that the reason that the police chiefs decided to assemble for their conference in Chicago is because they all wanted to come to see the turnaround that's going on in Chicago, to learn
yeah, that's
from
right.
Chicago how to reduce violence. Do you find that a credible statement?
No, I find it kind of comical.
Yeah,
really.
well,
I don't
yes.
know what stats he's looking at, but
It's almost
I
like he
am
sat down and
confident.
had forums on how you could be more like Chicago, which he did not do. So the whole thing was strange because it was out of his hands where they arranged where this conference was going to be.
We're not very good at,
Yeah.
and we're not very good at stopping violent crime, but we're very good at the political propaganda piece. Yeah.
No, exactly, and that's exactly what you hear. That's exactly. You know what? I'm not into propaganda. I work for Giuliani. I can promise you, you either got the job done or you got fired.
Yeah.
It was one or the other. So it's this is something I know can happen. It's happened in New York City and other cities that followed and emulated what we did in New York City. Chicago can be fixed, but it's never going to be fixed with the leadership it has now.
Now,
Never.
are you even though New York is experiencing historically low crime rates, and that's good news, President Trump is tired of the Big Apple. He's moving to Florida. How about you?
Well, I'm not moving to Florida yet. It's not a bad idea. It's not a bad idea.
He is Bernie Kerik. He's the former police commissioner for the New York City Police Department, best-selling author. Bernie Kerik, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.